for having me today. I've presented a couple of times for this organization. I really love the camaraderie that everybody gets from the community. And the reason that I chose this particular topic for today's discussion was from previous conversations where we had talked about positivity and self-care and boundary setting. And something that had come up quite a bit was communication with other people. And you'll get this a little bit from the discussion too, but the two main things that I think we want to focus on when we're communicating with other people is being effective as well as empathic, and trying to come up with a nice positive way of framing that communication with others. There'll be a couple of parts of this presentation where we will be encouraging participation from others, and maybe throughout the presentation you might have a question or a comment, something that really resonates with you. One of the nice things about Zoom, unlike when we're in person, you don't have to worry about necessarily raising your hand and speaking up. You can just type it out. A little bit about myself. I am a clinical social worker, and what that means is that I provide full-time psychotherapy for people. And so I'm a counselor by day, and then I do some of these other presentations on the side as well. I come from a background of having worked with people with chronic illness for several years, and so I like to fuse the information I gathered from that experience along with the kind of work I do now, which is primarily treating people for general mental health support, depression, anxiety, trauma, eating disorders, and that kind of thing. So I really want to thank you all for being with me today, and I hope that you can glean some great information from me and from each other. So just some of the goals that we have, some of the goals that we have for today. I want to provide you with the tools and techniques to improve communication to be more effective and empathic with others. Sorry, just pulling up my chat bar too. Excellent. And hello to everybody too. So we're going to be separating this by 3 primary sections, but that's the primary goal that we have. Again, effective and empathic communication. So we're looking at skills for communicating effectively with others, the building blocks of empathic communication, and then boundary setting. Some of this may be, if you've attended any of my sessions before, some of it may be overlap, but I think that it's worth repeating. So before we really get into it, I just wanted to share a little bit of context for this discussion. For one, you're not alone. Whether it's in some of the anonymous comments that we asked for when you registered for this discussion, or some of the comments that we make in the Zoom chat, know that no matter what your experiences are with others, they are valid, and we are here to listen. Talking is easy. I could talk until I'm blue in the face about my favorite foods, about the weather, about random things, but communication is hard. It's hard to convey the information that we have in our hearts, in our heads, and what we want other people to understand about us. And so communication prioritizes the other person or other people's understanding of what you're trying to share, what you want, or what you need. But it's not always very easy. And finding a new way to communicate with others feels really uncomfortable. Ever since we were born, we've been inundated with how other people think that we should communicate. From our words to our behaviors, breaking our natural communication habits is hard, and it doesn't feel especially comfortable at first. But with practice and with application, it can be really, really helpful. So, what do I mean when I say effective communication versus empathic communication? Effective communication is focused on sharing information in a way that the receiver, the other person or group that you're speaking with, can thoroughly understand what you're trying to convey or ask of them. Empathic communication, on the other hand, is actively sharing and listening while taking on perspectives, context, and feeling of others to improve our understanding. In many circumstances, you can have one or the other, but not always both. So for example, you could have very effective communication that is not empathic. For example, when I was growing up, I played a lot of basketball in my high school team, and my coaches were rough on us. Manly, you're too slow. You got to get the ball. You got to shoot it from this angle. So were they conveying the message to me? They sure were. But I don't know that they necessarily, when they were hounding at me when I was trying to dribble the basketball down the court, I don't know that empathy was necessarily the form of communication that they were looking to convey to me. But it was certainly effective. I knew what the coaches wanted, and it was very direct and blunt. On the other hand, sometimes we can have empathic communication that is not very effective. And this comes up quite a bit, I think, when we're trying to convey our symptoms to people and trying to convey what it is that we need from them and the support that we need. This could also be, let's say you might be talking with somebody about your sarcoidosis symptoms, and maybe they're saying, you know what, just be positive. You are strong. You will get through this. That might be coming from a place of empathy, but it's not especially effective. And so the goal throughout this presentation is to see, is there a way that we can find a way to fuse these two ideas, to have both effective and empathic communication, and to know that you are all deserving of this on the other hand. So if you're modeling for other people in your life these two different dynamics and ways of communicating, then hopefully they could learn a little bit of that, and you could be on the receiving end of it as well. All right, so we're just going to start with looking at skills for communicating effectively. I really love that so many of you volunteered your own experiences and the things that you wish your friends and loved ones understood about you. We limited it to 3 words or less. And I just wanted to show you folks that a lot of this had a lot of overlap. And some of the things that I put on here, actually many of you wrote almost exactly the same thing. Pain is real. I'm tired, I'm depressed, I'm in pain. I'm trying to sacrifice my integrity. I'm trying to communicate my sensitivity. And I want us to use this as the framework for what we wish we could communicate to others. So if we want other people to understand these different elements of us, we have to find a way to effectively communicate it to them, don't we? Okay. We're going to start with something called interpersonal effectiveness. It's a specific psychological technique to help convey messages to others effectively. It's based in a particular type of psychotherapy that I use in my practice. It's called dialectical behavioral therapy. Kind of a mouthful. And what the focus is on this, for example, compared to some other traditional types of therapy that you might be used to seeing on television, where you have somebody sitting on a couch and talking about their childhood, it's really focused on skill building and learning skills to manage your emotions and mindfulness. And in this particular framework, these skills are not going to tell us what to say, but they're going to give us a foundation that we can use for how to say these different things that we want to communicate to others, and just give us a benchmark and a framework and something to say, okay, maybe I don't know yet what I want to say, but this is how I want to say it to others. In this particular dynamic, and this particular therapy, we use a lot of mnemonic devices to try to simplify bigger concepts into a more digestible way of sort of approaching them, and again, making it easier to remember. So we want to be fast. And this is a way for communicating to others in a way that supports your self-respect. So we've just listed a bunch of these different things before we registered about things that we wish we could communicate to other people. And one of the ways in which we want to communicate this to others is in a way that supports our self-respect, because we don't want to compromise ourselves when we communicate what we need to others. So for example, we want to be fair. And by fairness, I mean not just fairness to others, but also to ourselves. If you're trying to communicate in a certain way, I don't want anybody in this group feeling like they have to compromise themselves in some way. And fairness might mean being fair to your physical condition. It might mean establishing fairness of you versus other colleagues or other family members or other friends. So fairness is really important. I wanted to draw this piece of communication somebody had submitted. It's not personal. right? So if you are communicating fairness to other people, let's say you're trying to communicate that you're just too tired for the day, right? You're not able to see people. That's not a personal attack on others. You're not lying to them. You're simply saying, my symptoms and my limitations at this time are not personal. And that's coming from a place of fairness to all people. So to whoever submitted that, thank you. And really thank you all for submitting what you have so far. I think it was really helpful. The second piece is apologies. And what we mean by that is no apologies. You don't need to apologize unless it's warranted, unless you've done something for which you need to apologize. But you don't have to apologize for making a request, having an opinion on something, or disagreeing with somebody. After all, it's like somebody said in the comments before they registered, I'm only human. We don't need to apologize for being human beings, for being people with differences than others, disagreements. That's not something that you need to apologize for. So when you communicate with others, start noticing if you find yourself apologizing more often. One of the tricks that I shared in my last presentation with this group is whenever you feel the tendency to say, I'm sorry, try to switch it to thank you. Instead of saying, I'm sorry I'm late, you could say, thank you for your patience. You know, if you're only human, some of us are going to be late. There's traffic, things happen, right? That's just one example. The S, stick to values. Let's say you're a private person. Maybe that's something that you really value for yourself. But maybe somebody has posted something on Facebook about you, about your private life that you don't agree with. So when you're communicating with that person, you want to communicate that those are your values. I am private. That's who you are. Our values are who we are. And we don't need to compromise that in any way when we communicate to others. And lastly, be truthful. I have limitations. So somebody had submitted this, and I thought that this was really interesting. And I think many times we often feel that we are hesitant to communicate our limitations to others. And many times that's because it's coming from a very vulnerable place. But we can be truthful to others and we can be vulnerable to other people because that's going to be a way of manifesting self-respect when we communicate to them. You don't have to lie. You don't have to be a superhero. You don't have to go above and beyond what you need and what you are doing for yourself. If somebody is asking you to commit to something that you can't physically do or you can't mentally do, or you simply don't have the time to do it, then it's okay to be truthful about it. And again, thanks everybody for everything that you submitted beforehand. It was really helpful to put it in context. Second, this give device is looking at how we can support the relationship. When we communicate with somebody else, we are trying to frame our communication in a way that supports the relationship, right? It's not just about us. We want to do what we just talked about, those fast skills. We want to communicate in a way that preserves our own integrity, our own dignity, but we also want to support the communication and the relationship we have with the other person. We want to be gentle. I have a young toddler son, and I was joking with my husband as I was, processing the slides for this particular presentation, and we're always telling our toddler to be gentle, whether he's engaging with younger children or with animals or anything or even just with objects around the house because he's throwing everything everywhere. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting is we really don't put an emphasis on gentleness when we're adults. Oftentimes I think that, especially now I'm seeing, having worked in healthcare, there can be a lot of animosity to other people. We tend to sometimes get angry and take out our frustration on others. And we can support the relationship that we have, whether it's a close loved one or the relationship you have with a total stranger, somebody in customer service, in food service, or anything like that, and to look at being gentle. Act interested, right? I am definitely guilty of this. We need to put down our phones. We need to make eye contact. We need to support the other person by saying, I am interested in what you have to say. Even if maybe the topic of conversation isn't something that you particularly care about. Maybe it's not something that you're naturally interested in. but supporting the relationship means demonstrating an interest in the other person's interest sometimes. I think we all have examples in our lives of people who have hobbies or maybe a reading interest that we don't particularly share that with, but we can still communicate to that person, I see you. I'm interested in what it is that you are presenting to me. We want to validate the person who's there, right? Let's say I was talking about customer service before, right? Sometimes it can be really frustrating if the person that you're speaking with maybe has no control over the situation or circumstances for which you're frustrated with. Listen, I know that I'm really frustrated about this interaction, but I don't think that there's a lot that you can do about it. Why don't I speak to your manager, right? Validating, you're not in a position of power to fix this problem for me. So I'm going to support us working together by validating the position that you're in. And that's just again, that's a complete stranger, but we do that. We validate this with other people. I understand why you're upset. I can see where you would come to that conclusion. And then the last one, use an easy manner. I think that a little bit of humor can certainly be helpful, a little bit of a reference, some gentle poking around. When we talk about communication, it's not all just about the really intense heart-to-heart conversations that we have with people. Sometimes it's just day-to-day check-ins, and we can be easy with one another. And if we can focus on that, sometimes it makes whatever it is that we're trying to communicate to them a lot better. And of course, I had to put our dear friend to everybody, our favorite neighbor, Fred Rogers, right? So I think that he is so good at communicating all of give. Fred Rogers is gentle. He acts interested. If you ever look at some of the old Fred Rogers tapes on YouTube, maybe from his early showings, one of the things that I picked up on that I thought was so lovely is the level of interest with which he demonstrates towards children. They could be saying something silly, a random observation, and he acts like it's the most interesting thing he's ever heard. And I just love that. And I think that if we did that to all children and to all adults in our lives, we'd be better off, right? And again, the validating, the easy manner. Fred Rogers is not a angry, confrontational person, right? And he's gentle. He's gentle and fun and loving and supportive and celebratory. We can incorporate all of these different elements. And and I'm sure maybe all of you have somebody that you think of in your own life who espouses all of these different values. And that might be a person that you are really invested in that relationship because of the way that they've communicated all these different facets. Okay. I feel statements. So this is where that uncomfortable way of communicating with each other comes in. So to talk about how we feel and using the way that we feel first in a conversation is not typical for us. It's uneasy. It feels formulaic. It doesn't feel natural. But it can be really effective and helpful when we're feeling angry, especially, to communicate what it is that we're feeling. First, you state the feeling. How are you actually feeling? Getting to that vulnerable space. I feel betrayed. I feel sad. I feel disappointed. When you say this about me, when you make this recommendation, when you send me these kinds of links, when you such and such, right? Because, so what caused that reaction? Because I'm very sensitive about that particular subject. Because of my past. Because this is just the way that I prefer to communicate. Because this is a very important value to me. What I need is, what do we need for that person to change their behavior? What I need is for you to stop. What I need is for you to give me a heads up next time. What I need is for you to be a little bit gentler when you bring this topic up. And we'll have some examples on the next slide. But again, this is just a way to start telling people more about the ways that you're feeling, because the tendency is to address the behavior or the thing that we are not feeling comfortable with. I work with patients quite a bit, and especially with people who are working a lot during COVID, or when we're sharing a lot of space together, it's really hard to communicate how we feel to others when we get angry about something. You're never home. I don't get space here anymore. I don't get free time to do blah, 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 blah. You never do the dishes, right? So our tendency when we argue and when we talk to one another is about the behavior, not necessarily the feeling. I feel overwhelmed. I feel anxious, because we typically don't want to address those feelings because they're more vulnerable. It's about us first. However, it can be very effective and helpful to explain to the other person what you are feeling in that moment rather than criticizing the behavior right away. Let me show you what I mean by this. I feel disappointed when you say I don't look sick, because it invalidates the invisible pain of my illness. What I need is understanding that while you may not see it, sometimes my disease makes me very uncomfortable, right? I need understanding. I'm feeling disappointed. The emphasis is on communicating your feelings, right? I feel disappointed. That's a very specific feeling, right? And then setting expectations. I just need a little bit of understanding from you, right? And communicating with them the specific things that you're frustrated with when they say certain things to you. However, what typically comes out when we're angry, right? I feel like you're being a real jerk when you say things like that, because you obviously don't care how I feel. And what I need is for you to get out of my face. It's minimizing, it's angry, and it shuts down the communication. And this, again, this is what naturally comes from, we all learn different ways of how to communicate. And then many times I like to tell my patients that anger is a very easy emotion compared to the other ones, right? Anger is external. It's about other people. It shuts people out. I don't have to address my really deep feelings of being hurt when I can communicate to somebody else. I have a comment here. I've been told that women should never say I feel, but rather should say I believe, etc. I'm being disrespected when you do this. This is because you will be seen as an emotional woman, not a thoughtful, rational human being with the right to stand up for herself. What are your thoughts? Well, thank you very much for that comment. I think that's really important. I think especially, I've heard a lot of these kinds of criticisms of this way of thinking, especially when it comes to the business world. We are often taught that in business, we shouldn't be communicating about our emotions, but rather the context and the facts behind it. And I'll get into this a little bit later, because the context with which we're speaking can change the way that we communicate. The way I talk to my boss is going to be different than the way I speak with, let's say, one of my in-laws. So, and it's interesting because especially when we talk about gender differences, right? Men and women being told that they need to communicate differently. Personally, I don't really agree with that. I think that we can encourage more vulnerable discussions for both men, or I should say not both men and women, but all genders, include being gender inclusive of that. And I think we certainly want to frame these I feel statements in a way of saying, I believe that we can work on this. I believe, and that's what I really like about the end piece of this. What I need is, the feeling is just the beginning. The feeling and the introduction of what was done is just the beginning. But we want to create room for improvements. We want to create room for change. So yeah, I think I'd have to think about that a little bit. And I think certainly people are going to have different ways of expressing how they feel. So if it's easier to say, I believe this, maybe especially if you feel like your beliefs are being challenged, then that would be really important for you to bring that up. But some of it's going to take practice. And the other thing too is I want people to feel comfortable addressing how it is that they feel. I think if more people were to speak this way, we would feel more comfortable in general expressing those feelings. Because if everybody's saying, I feel, we're not going to be less likely to criticize it. Just my 2 cents. So just to recap, the communication skills about respecting ourselves, Be fair, no apologies, stick to your values, and be truthful. That's for yourself. Be gentle, act interested, validate, and use an easy manner with other people. These give skills are about helping to sustain the relationship. And then I feel, structure your key points with specific recommendations based on your truths. How are you feeling in that moment? Really sharing the emotions that are coming up first, and then create solutions for how this could be avoided next time. All right. Now we're going to be looking at some of those building blocks for empathic listening. You can see even from the body language and some of the ways in which people are engaging in these different pictures. Some people maybe are demonstrating empathic listening and maybe not. And what's funny is that it's just pictures, but yet we can infer a lot from body language, from tone of voice, from eye contact, what somebody else is trying to communicate to us. We want to be present. This is one of the building blocks of empathic listening. This is kind of like what I was saying before about maintaining eye contact, trying to put our phones away if we can. And then monitoring our body language and verbal cues. It's really funny. Obviously I live in the Chicagoland area. I've mentioned that before. And I have a tendency to get very cold, and it's just naturally a very cold part of the country. And so I, without realizing it, had a tendency to cross my arms and kind of almost like hold myself, which to others would make me seem very closed off or anxious even, when many times I just had cold hands. But until somebody had mentioned that, I hadn't thought that I would be communicating in a certain way. So if we communicate openness, even the stance that we have with others, and that demonstrates a different type of being present with other people. Then we want to summarize or paraphrase what the other person has said. People really feel listened to when we feel that we can talk back to them about what it is that they have just said to us. Let me see if I understand the timeline. So you're saying that this person did this, and then this person did this, and then you said this. Is that what happened? Okay, go ahead. I'm listening. Or what I'm hearing you say is blank. And that's something that you can practice, every time that you have a conversation. And it may seem like, well, Sandra, that's really going to duplicate the length with which we have every conversation if I'm summarizing everything that the other person is telling me. But I think people appreciate it. I think it's another way of demonstrating to that person I really am listening. And we can do it more for some of those more intense conversations. It doesn't have to necessarily be about running errands or picking stuff up from the grocery store. Although admittedly, I have to say, doesn't it feel a lot better when you're in food service and they summarize your order for you? It really makes you feel like they're listening, right? Special order, okay, no onions, no ketchup, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, that person was really listening. I feel better about what I've just ordered. It's the same thing when we have general communication with other people. Just like I was saying before, I can't stress this enough, validate. That must have been really hard for you. Or, given how you were brought up, I could see how you could feel that way. You've been in such a stressful time. I can't imagine what that was like for you. And everybody has different ways of communicating that validation to others. And we will sometimes tailor our language based on the other person that we're speaking to. Whether it's young children, we sort of change our language, or other cultures, right? And that level of validation is going to depend on what that person needs in that moment. And so you could even ask yourself, what does this person need validated when I'm having this conversation with them? Or even going back to the times that you have felt invalidated. Sometimes the best way of looking at what is empathic listening and empathic communication is what is the opposite. So I'm sure many of you have felt moments when you felt invalidated. Well, it doesn't seem like it's that bad. Are you really in that much pain? You don't look that tired. You seem pretty well rested. So again, sometimes if you look at what's invalidating, you do the opposite. It's a little bit easier for us to figure out, oh, that's validating. Okay, maybe it's easier than I thought. The next point is asking open-ended questions. It's so funny. This is something that if you've ever had a retail job, this is a very important part of your training. Can I help you with anything today? Nope. That's a closed-ended question, right? Something that ends in a yes or no question or a one-worded answer, versus open-ended questions are much more engaging with other people. Who are you shopping for today? Myself. Oh, okay. What are you shopping for? Keeps going, right? Same thing with when we're talking with other people about everyday things. What was that like for you? How can I do better next time? We just got another question from somebody. This was a direct message to me, but it's anonymous, so I am going to share it. What is the best way to deal with a sibling who gives unsolicited advice or minimizes what you are going through? This makes me sad on a regular basis. I'm going to direct you back to the previous slides that we were just talking about with these I feel statements. I feel really sad when you give me X advice because it makes me feel like you're not listening, because I don't find the advice to be very helpful. What I need is more supportive language. And sometimes I think that it can be helpful because many times that the unsolicited advice and minimizing of how you feel is, interestingly enough, it's usually coming from a good place, right? People want to give us advice or they want to try to boost us up in some way. Getting some feedback. Okay, just making sure that we're good. And that unsolicited advice may be coming from that other person feeling like your situation is out of their control. That doesn't make it okay for them to give that advice, but I think we do need to find a way to empathically communicate to them, you know, it's really bringing me down, this advice that you're giving me, and it's not helping me. And I always say that we can approach more confrontational communication with others through curiosity. So even if it feels uncomfortable to talk about how it is that you're feeling with your sibling, to ask, what is it doing for you to be giving me that advice? Where is this advice coming from? Are you feeling upset or like my sarcoidosis is out of your control, right? Where is that coming from? Oh, well, I had just read this article and it seemed like this particular procedure or recommendation was very helpful for them. So I thought I'd share it with you. I appreciate that. However, I feel very sad when you give me this advice because it really makes me feel invalidated. I'm going to ask that you stop. And next time, maybe offer more positive affirmations, and I think especially it can be very helpful giving that person something else instead of what they're doing. Find something to replace it with, right? So if, for some of you who may have been former smokers, one of the main techniques when people are quitting smoking is to give something else for you to do with your hands, or another way of changing the way that you're doing things in terms of the associations you have. Maybe you were accustomed to having a cigarette every day after lunch, so this time you have tea instead. So if people are very systematically have a pattern of doing something for you that's not working, give them something else instead. Send me a prayer, send me a positive image of the grandkids, of my niece and nephew, of a positive place that we can travel once COVID's over, something like that, but offering that person something else instead of that. The next piece I want to talk about, and I'm really glad because I think that addressed the unsolicited advice for sure. Especially criticism. You know, most of the time when we're talking with people, we don't want criticism, right? Maybe unless it's your annual review at work, then maybe you want criticism, you want to be doing a better job. But most of the time we don't want it. And that's another thing too, to communicate with people if they don't understand, to say, hey, I understand that you may not want criticism or unsolicited advice when I talk to you. I'm just asking for the same back. I really like this point of leaving room for silence. So sometimes when we're talking about really heavy or deep conversations, people may need some time to process that. And so leaving a little bit of room in the conversation for silence, letting that person digest. And the silence also gives us a little bit of time to come up with a good strategy for how we want to communicate. If you've ever been in a really heated argument where people are saying things and volleying insults to each other over and over again, we're not really giving time to pause and think about what we're going to say. We're just volleying insults and offensive things to one another. And so sometimes if you just have a little bit of a pause, a little bit of silence, it gives you some time to think about what you want to say next. And last, follow up. Hey, remember when you told me this thing last week? How are you doing with that? Is that getting any better? I really like a close friend of mine throughout the pandemic has periodically sent me the question, what color are you today? Are you yellow? Are you red? Are you blue? And then that person can elaborate. And you can have fun with it. I'm champagne. I am chocolate brown. I like a lot of food. So of course I'm going to try to be more food oriented with my colors. But there are different ways that we can follow up with people in a way that also makes them feel like we were really listening. Remember when you told me that this happened in your family? How are you dealing with that? You said you were in a lot of pain last week. Has that gotten any better? So we can follow up with people, keep the conversation going. All right. Probably my favorite part of these talks, setting boundaries. This is a Annie Lamott quote. No is a complete sentence. I just want to follow up. Oh, I'm so glad that you felt validated from my response to your question. And I think that we can all validate each other, right? What you've just described, getting unsolicited advice, I can't think of anybody who hasn't had that experience. And so if we can find ways to help each other, then it's a good thing. And I love our family must fill every silence in conversation. We tend to over-explain in our efforts to help someone or make them feel comfortable. And I think that is part of, it can come from uncomfortableness, right? So sometimes we just keep talking, we're saying something uncomfortable, so I need to fill the silence. And it can be uncomfortable, right? And sometimes we can just model for people by being a little bit quieter in a conversation. Wow, Sandra's not really responding very much. Yeah, sorry guys, I'm just trying to think about what I want to say. Right? You can explain your silence too, and then also offer that as a way to role model for other people. But thank you for your comments, folks. I really appreciate them. Setting boundaries. No is a complete sentence. Again, as I said, that's an Annie Lamott quote. We don't need to justify our boundaries to other people, but boy, are they really, really hard to set. We invited folks prior to registering to share how you feel when setting boundaries with friends or loved ones. Empowered. Rock on to whoever wrote this. Good job. Frustrated. Uncomfortable. Awful. Somebody else wrote in sick. In control. Anxious. Hard. Uncomfortable. Guilty. All of these are valid, folks. You could feel great setting boundaries in 1 minute or in one context and feel awful in another. You might feel very, very comfortable setting boundaries, at a restaurant. Oh, waiter, excuse me. I thought I ordered this burger with no onions. Could you send it back, please? Thank you so much. But then be terrified to have a boundary conversation with a family friend, or vice versa. The context really matters quite a bit when we're setting our boundaries. I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that and to know that it's not very easy, not for anyone. Drawing the boundaries often isn't the hard part. Like we said before, no is a complete sentence, but it's the consequences of boundaries that we can fear the most. Not just the language. No, if we say that no is a complete sentence, that's pretty easy. I can attest my toddler is very familiar with the word no. We learn it from a very young age. But it's the consequences, right? I don't want to feel guilty. I don't want to be perceived as cold or mean when I say I can't do something or I don't want to. And part of overcoming the difficulty here is understanding that we're not doing anything wrong. Boundaries are expectations. They're not hard and fast walls in communication. And we make room for being our fullest selves when we preserve our energy, our integrity, our time, and we're letting people know what we can and cannot do. And that's okay. Connie Sun is a very talented cartoonist. I really like her work. She writes a lot about mental health work. So I just wanted to include her website here. And it was so great. She was able to share permission to share this cartoon with you folks today. And I really like it. It says, "I like drawing boundaries. See, I'm good at it. This is comfortable. I feel safe. Oh, but what if this is getting in the way of my personal growth and development? Ah, boogers." And I thought that was really, really cute. And I think it's so interesting. So when I was first researching, occasionally when I do presentations, I like to look up different cartoons, but I definitely want to make sure that unless it's something that's been released for public distribution, that I ask the author or the illustrator for permission to use the particular cartoon that they are sharing on the internet. And initially, when I was looking up this cartoon, it only included the top 3 parts. So I sent it to the author and I said, "Hi, my name is Sandra. I'm doing this presentation. I'd like to share this particular cartoon." And she wrote back saying, "I'm so sorry to be a pain, but actually I do not allow the use of my images unless it's the full cartoon. I don't want it clipped. I don't want it snipped. I just want, or cropped or any of that. I want it to be the full thing." So I said, "Of course, you've just set a boundary." Right? So you can imagine if I had told her, "Oh, well, your cartoon's no good. I only wanted to use these 3." But it was interesting. And I said to her, I said, "You don't have to apologize for that. You don't have to say, 'Sorry for being a pain,' or 'I don't want to be nitpicky.' That's an appropriate boundary for an artist to make sure that the entire cartoon is included." And it's funny because I didn't even know that it had been clipped. She had, on some social media platform, put out the cartoon, but only in little chunks of it. That's why I'd only seen the top 3 cells of the comic. But again, this is just another example that setting boundaries is difficult. This is this young woman's profession. It makes sense that she would want to set those boundaries, but even then she still felt the need to apologize for it. But again, it makes sense to draw those boundaries given her profession. And I was perfectly willing to accept it. So I hope you folks like it. Again, cartoonconnie.com, really great mental health support for that. We have a comment in the Zoom chat. "I feel that family and friends try to resist the boundaries we have set and bring us back to their expectations of us." Thank you. I think that is very insightful. And I think it's so important that we try to understand why that is. Oftentimes, people get used to us being a certain way and not asserting our boundaries with others. I have a saying with my patients that the people who react the most to your boundaries are the ones who need them the most. Again, that's the people who react the most to your boundaries are the ones who need them the most. So, for example, let's say you have a Zoom chat planned in the evening with some friends of yours, but you're feeling very tired and you don't feel like you can really, even though it's just online, you don't have to travel anywhere, what have you, but you just don't feel like you have the mental energy to give to these people. So you say, "Hey folks, can we postpone the Zoom chat? I just don't think I have the energy today." I have one patient who calls it her social bucket is out. She needs to recharge a little bit, right? And the reaction from those people will dictate the degree to which they need stronger boundaries from you. So the people who say, "No big deal. I've totally been there. It wasn't a very easy week for us. Let's meet each other next week." They don't really need your boundaries that much, do they? Because they already understand, and it's probably easier to set boundaries with them because those are people you can trust to respect them. Whereas the people who say, oh man, I was really looking forward to seeing you. Are you sure you can't make it? Those people need those boundaries more, don't they? And again, people become accustomed to us doing things a certain way. So if they're used to you being agreeable and doing things that they want, they're going to really resist the boundaries you start pushing back against. And to know that in our American culture, at least, people who are constantly giving of themselves are held in very high regard. The people who are always saying yes to things, the people who are constantly volunteering or they're part of the PTA, who overcommit themselves. You're such an overachiever. My goodness, I don't know how you do it. You are a superhero. You're doing so much. When we reinforce that as something positive, it makes it harder for us to draw back and say, I'm not going to be able to commit to that as much. I'm not going to be able to do X because I don't have it in me right now. And that's even harder if you come from a place where people have had those expectations of you for such a long time. The people who react to your boundaries the most are the ones who need them the most. And so too, the people who respect our boundaries the most, make sure you tell them, thank you so much for respecting my boundaries. Thank you so much for understanding that I don't have the energy to give this to you today. I really appreciate it. I want to give my full self to you. I want to make sure that I'm there for you. You know, I'm just in kind of a cruddy mood tonight, guys. Can we postpone? Sure. Thank you so much. I'll be in a much better mental space the next time we hang out, or the next time we see each other, or the next time we, whatever it is. Boundaries in the age of COVID-19. So I've just been expressing a couple of examples of Zoom get-togethers, that kind of thing. And what's interesting is COVID really kind of gave us a crash course in boundary setting. Seemingly overnight, we had to go from general discomfort with setting boundaries to being pushed towards it because it meant a lot more to us, didn't it? We were talking about, you know, being immunocompromised and being in a situation where it could be life or death, especially, you know, we know a lot more about COVID now, and we've had to mourn deaths and mourn side effects, the folks who have lost their taste and smell, and so many other parts of it. But when I think we were pushed and backed into a corner when it came to life or death or severe illness, we had to quickly come up with language to say what we were or were not comfortable with. And for some of us, it's still difficult, you know, to say, I'm so sorry, could you keep 6 feet? Could you please put your mask over your nose? I really appreciate it. That's still uncomfortable for so many of us. But for some of us, whether it was gathering around holidays or something else like that, we were forced to do it. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with our boundaries once things kind of return, not to normal, but once we start becoming more comfortable seeing people. And so hopefully we can kind of build on these skills and keep them going, right? So one of the things I tell people, because I think it can feel uncomfortable to set expectations and limitations because of our COVID boundaries or just the physical comfort or discomfort we may be having. So one of the things I try to talk about is when people make requests of you and you're not comfortable, turn the conversation to what you are comfortable with. I wouldn't really feel comfortable coming over for coffee until we can meet outdoors. Why don't we plan a Zoom date? I feel comfortable with that. I want to socialize with you, but I want to do it in a way that feels comfortable. I don't really feel comfortable doing this, but I do feel comfortable doing this. Even if that means delaying it. You know, it's going to get nicer weather in a month or two. Let's just postpone, okay? That can also be something that's a formula you can use for setting boundaries, even if it doesn't have to do with, let's say, COVID specifically. It could also be the ways of what we're comfortable with in terms of commitments that are expected of us, right? Just reading a message from somebody. And direct messages to me are perfectly fine, just especially if we can share it with the group, other people might benefit from it. So just reading, so somebody had shared, believe it or not, I get a lot of pushback because I'm single. It's almost like if I was married and had sarcoidosis, they'd be more understanding. But because I'm single, they think it's just me, right? And that doesn't really have a lot to do with anything. But they don't understand that you're dealing with a chronic illness, running a home, finances, cars, and it can get hard and overwhelming. And family doesn't seem to respect that. I think that being single isn't just something that families tend to disrespect, but places of employment as well. You can stay late on a Saturday, right? You don't have kids. You don't have people to go home to, right? And this is something I think has been a problem for a long time. And so I think oftentimes to know that you can still set those boundaries with other people, even though it's just for you. You don't have to justify it for anything. But I think that's a really important point to make, and that that's part of the issue with boundaries, is that people make presumptions about what is acceptable or not acceptable. But, for example, something that I thought it was really interesting, right, is the people who ask, hey, what are you doing this weekend? You got any fun plans? No? Great. Why don't you come help me with my house project? You may not necessarily be in the mood to acquiesce to a request for a favor just because you don't have anything planned that weekend. Maybe you need that time to rest and relax, right? But again, it's assumptions that are made. And I think that this is a really good comment because it's true. Being single versus being with a family, there are assumptions made by many people. But to also broaden that scope to say what other assumptions are being made because of the kind of work that you do or something else. I was working with a patient who has 2 adult children and found that she was making excuses for one child who seemed to have a more demanding career. But it's not fair to either child if they're kind of creating different lenses with which to view their ability to do something or not do something. That everybody, when it's just a matter of how well we set our boundaries with these people. And I'll have some slides in the next couple of slides that talk a little bit about language we can use too. So I talked about context is key. The way that I talk to my boss is different than how I talk to my family members. The way I talk to my spouse is different than the way I speak with my in-laws. We can be direct and polite, but the ways in which we communicate might be different. So the comment that was made before was somebody talking about saying, I feel. So for example, at work, instead of saying I feel, we might say something like I don't appreciate, or something that feels a little bit more business. Or again, it might be easier to set boundaries at work if there is a code that you can reference back to, or a policy for conduct that you can reference back to. Whereas with family members, unless you have a very well-developed family crest or guidebook for how to act with one another, we don't have anything that's so black and white to go back to. So context is really key on how to set boundaries with other people. My goodness, I say this to my patients a lot. Texting is going to put me in business until I'm well into old age. Knock on wood that I make it there. Text and email are closed conversations. You don't get the nuance of body language, tone of voice. And I like to say it's like several mini monologues rather than a dialogue back and forth to one another. It's clipped, it's short. And I'm a millennial myself. I certainly have a lot of people who communicate with folks younger than them. And I got the pushback I get from a lot of patients who are sort of trying to have intergenerational conversations with people. Well, that's just how they talk. Younger people just text all the time. But if there's something that you need to do to set a boundary or to set an expectation or have a very difficult conversation, I have something that I'd really like to discuss with you. Can we find time to meet in person or via Zoom or have a phone conversation? Whatever, if that person's in your bubble or not in your bubble. So I think, again, just remember, and the other thing too is that it can really feel challenging because of the timing that is incorporated with those things. So for example, the response time, it's 2021 and people will read into the response time of an email or a text message, right? So if somebody doesn't reply to you right away, oh gosh, that person's angry with me, that person is upset. Whereas if we're talking on the phone or if we're in person, we can gather a lot more information, again, from their tone of voice or anything like that. So it's super important that if it's a really important conversation, that's fine. I like to say texting is great for, hey, I'm running to the grocery store, can I get you anything? Or just letting you know I'm thinking about you, love you, right? That we can use it for quick conversations, things that are more logistical or practical in nature. Hey, I'm getting rid of this stack of clothing to Goodwill. Are you interested in any of them? Great opportunities for text messaging. But the really intensive conversations, and I always say, especially if it is something that is, if you feel uncomfortable having the conversation, don't have it via text or email. And the other nice thing about that too is if somebody is starting a conversation through text or email and you already feel uncomfortable with it, communicate, set that boundary. I feel very uncomfortable having this conversation via text message. When can we talk? What's a good time for you, right? I like somebody had written in, so many misunderstandings with text, especially with abbreviated wording. Absolutely. And somebody saying, yes, it's so true. I think, and the other thing too is we can let people know why we are not interested in having text messages or emails with people, right? I just don't feel like I don't get to hear your voice. I think sometimes maybe, and you can blame it on yourself. I feel like I have miscommunication, right? So somebody had just written into me, how do I deal with sending out greeting cards and getting no response from people? Do I quit? This is so great. And I've actually had a lot of patients who have communicated this to me specifically. I think a lot of times it depends on to whom are those greeting cards being sent to. Especially younger grandchildren, you could have a conversation with the parents. Hey, I'd like to have some kind of acknowledgement of this. And again, what is the feeling that's behind it? I feel dismissed. I feel unvalued. Or even just I feel lonely. I'd love to get some mail back. And again, these are not easy conversations to have. Another thing to think about, if it feels more comfortable, if you still want to acknowledge somebody, but you don't want to take the time to purchase the greeting card. Greeting cards do cost money, and in certain circumstances, the nicer ones can be very expensive, plus a stamp, getting to a post office, that kind of thing. If it feels more comfortable, even using something like paperless post, you can craft a nice, simple greeting card that is just through email, and maybe it doesn't feel so like you're investing so much of yourself into something like that. But really checking in with yourself on what is the feeling that's coming from it, and checking in with either the direct person that you're sending it to or family members. And forgive me, I'm just taking a minute to read through some of these messages, so I want to make sure that if it's applicable to the whole group that I should share it. And so there's somebody else who was validating what the other person was saying. I had a problem with my married older sister who thought I was never busy because I wasn't married and had no children when my parents had dementia. Sometimes there is no way to reach this type of person, and even if they, especially if they are narcissistic in nature, they simply stepped in to be there for my parents when siblings were too busy. And I'm glad I don't have any contact with them now. It's my friends who are there and who empathize with me about issues that I'm empathize with me about the issues I am facing. And as my late mother told me, you are not like them, meaning her siblings. Find friends and family, and remember, you choose your friends, not your family. And that she was a true care partner, and my friends try to understand my challenges. Part of boundary setting and setting expectations is also compromise. So if you're asking me to commit X, I am asking you to also commit X. this doesn't come up with just caregiving responsibilities, but also household duties. And I think sometimes it can be really inappropriate when people who have families that they're taking care of put the equal emphasis, or more than the equal emphasis, of caregiving onto other people, and just presuming that it's their role because they don't have other family to take care of. This is really where I want to go into. So I'm talking about being assertive but polite. So that addresses the F, fair, and the fast mnemonic that I talked about at the beginning of this presentation. In the fast skills is being fair. So not only to others, but also to yourself. That's being fair to you, right? It isn't fair that you expect me to take on the caregiving responsibilities just because I don't have a family of my own. Yeah, and I love, we've got somebody who's just written in that I just made the comment about greeting cards. I also, if you go have a Dollar Tree near you, all the cards are $1 or 2 for $1. I completely agree. But I think that's a good thing. And yes, it's good to get the greeting cards that are less expensive. However, we also want to address, when we send those cards, are we doing it to get something back? Are we doing it because we just want to express to that other person? I think one thing that we can also do when we're looking at that is modeling for other people. So if that person has sent you a card and you really enjoyed it and thought it was really helpful, sending it back to them and saying, or sending like a picture of it, hey, I just got your card. Thank you so much. Sending them a quick text. I want to stay in touch with family and friends. Some respond, yay, others just don't. Do I tell them I'd like to hear back from them? I think that's perfectly reasonable. You know, and there's different ways of, when I talk about those I feel statements, they can also be for good things. Hey, I just want you to know, I feel really good when I hear that you have acknowledged that I've sent you something, whether it's a gift or whether it is a greeting card or something like that. It's okay, I think, for us to ask of people. And it's funny because I think there's so much that we assume that people know about us. Well, don't they know I want a response? Don't they know I want at least a thank you for this? And because of the way that things are going intergenerationally and the way that technology is moving, I don't think anything can be assumed anymore. Especially, I've just had a lot of really good conversations with my patients about Valentine's Day, for example. I had a patient who early on in her relationship with her then boyfriend, now husband, they didn't have a lot of money. And she had said, you know, I really don't want flowers this year for Valentine's Day. We're a little strapped for cash. It would just be something that would die within a week. I'm just not interested. But fast forward several years and her priorities had changed. And she wanted some acknowledgement of Valentine's Day. They had a little bit more money that they could use to spend on things like that. But she had never had the conversation with her partner about wanting to get those flowers again. So he was still thinking back on the assumption from when they were first dating that she thought that flowers were frivolous. So that's something I think is that sometimes we do have to, as uncomfortable as it may be, ask for the things that we want out of these conversations. And some people may push back, but again, just like I said before, the people who react to most to our boundaries are the ones who need them the most. And so, and that's not even a boundary necessarily, but it's expressing what it is that you want. And if somebody isn't willing to give you what you want, you take that into account. You take that and you say, okay, I'm sending out these cards to people. I'd really like to at least have some acknowledgement. Just let me know you received it, right? Mail is kind of up in the air these days with everything, with the snowstorms and the challenges with the postal service that we've had this year. Maybe we just want to know that you got them, right? Or did you like the card, right? And if those people aren't willing to give them back to you, then you get to make the decision on whether or not you stop giving those. That's the boundary that you get to set. I just thought I'd include a couple of language cheat sheets for how we set boundaries with other people, because sometimes we have, yeah, like I said, no is a complete sentence, right? But we might want something a little bit more nuanced or something specific depending on what other people are asking of us. I am not comfortable with this. Or I do not want to. I have a very close friend of mine from back in high school. we really love the artist Melody Gardot. So she has a very classic sound to her, jazz, really interesting story. If you ever look her up, she recovered from a major car accident with music therapy and ended up making this really rich music. I think it's really great. So we had gone to a concert for the first time together, had seen this person probably over 10 years ago at this point. And I had another concert that I wanted to go to, and I invited her to come with me. And she was so respectful and said, I really appreciate the invitation, but this music of this other artist just isn't my style. Maybe we can go to something else another time. And she was not disrespectful. She was appropriate, and she set an appropriate boundary. Because what would have happened if she had gone to that concert, right? She wouldn't have had a very good time. She wouldn't have liked the music. She would have taken up a seat of somebody else who maybe would have really enjoyed it. So it was perfectly appropriate for her to set that boundary. So sometimes I just don't want to. That's okay. That will not work for me. I'm very clear. I'm asking you to stop. But what are we asking that person to stop doing? Be as specific as you can so that you can come back to it, right? Remember, I told you last time that I'm asking you to stop making comments about my weight. It really helps when we can get as specific for those people who need those boundaries, right? Stop sending me links to things. The person who earlier had made comments about stopping unsolicited advice about what? I'm asking you to stop giving me advice about blah, 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 right? Maybe we're okay getting advice in one area, but not getting advice in another. Just looking at another comment. I have a similar situation to the person who mentioned our difficult siblings in dealing with elderly parents, trying to have my elderly parents address end-of-life issues while they can, but they avoid the topic, so having to tell them how I feel, why, and set boundaries instead. Something to take note of too, April is National Healthcare Decisions Month, so sometimes there might be some beneficial information that comes out of hospitals, or it might be good to sort of start that as a conversation. And the other thing too with end of life planning, power of attorney documentation, things like that, is modeling for other people. Mom, Dad, I just want to let you know I've completed my healthcare power of attorney for myself so that if something were to happen to me medically and I couldn't make decisions for myself, then this is the person who can follow up for me. Are you interested in completing a document like this? It's definitely something to do. But the person who wrote this message to me, I think, did a really good job by saying they avoid the topic. So I tell them how I feel and why. Why are you, I'm feeling kind of anxious that you haven't completed this paperwork, that kind of thing. It's super important. And then I have a comment from somebody saying, I know very few people who can handle responses that are direct, and most end up offended. How do you deal with that? I think this is where we go back to the empathic way of talking with folks about setting those boundaries. And again, anytime that there's a conversation that feels confrontational, to inquire with curiosity. I'm sensing that you might be offended by something I've just said, and I want to ask, what's happening? Where are you right now? Tell me how you're feeling. Well, I just feel like you never want to spend time with me anymore. I'm so sorry you feel that way, but it's not personal. My sarcoidosis has just left me feeling really tired, and unfortunately, I just can't commit to as much as I used to. I promise it's not about you, but I am so grateful that you told me how you felt, right? Because if people are feeling offended, there's a reason for it. So sometimes if we pick out what the reason is, then we can try to address it. If the reason that person is feeling offended is not maybe a true reason, or they're not willing to extrapolate on why they're having that reaction to the boundary that you're setting, then they may end up being one of those people that needs your boundaries more. And then you start making decisions about how much do I want this person in my life. Getting to more of the language and cheat sheets for this. I had a lot of folks in my previous presentation, they did tell me about volunteering opportunities that they did for a specific organization or something where they were giving their time, but because of disease progression, getting older, COVID, that they wanted to pull away from some of these obligations. I have enjoyed my time volunteering for this organization, but after such and such time, I am no longer able to give my time to this endeavor. And remember that you don't have to say why. Maybe you just don't want to anymore. You've been volunteering for a long time, or you're just not interested anymore. Maybe you want to volunteer for a different organization. That's okay. But you can succinctly tell people that that's why you're not interested. Let me sleep on it. Or if anybody watches Wanda Sykes, I think she's a great comedian. She often will say things like, just let that marinate a little bit, right? So let's marinate on that, right? And if you don't know if you want to commit to something, somebody is asking something of you, but you need a little bit of time to think about it, take that pause. Let me think about it. Can I get back to you on that? Especially if this is at work, your boss is trying to recommend a promotion that's going to mean more time at the proverbial office or a project that you're not very interested in. Give yourself some time. Even if there's a part of you that says, oh, I really, really, really don't want to do this, you can also buy yourself time to come up with the right way of phrasing how you don't want to participate in that particular expectation, and giving yourself more time to set that boundary. So let's practice. Close friend calls you late at night. He wants to talk because he just broke up with his significant other and wants to process. You're already very tired and you have an early meeting the next day. What are some things you could say to this friend to assert your boundaries? And if you could send these to everybody in the Zoom chat rather than just to me, I think that would be good, because then everybody else can see what you've written. So close friend calls you late at night. He wants to talk because he just broke up with his significant other, wants to process. You're very tired, have an early meeting the next day. Not related to this, but somebody else said that her mother gets offended, and it's super hard because they go round and round in their conversations. And it's the one thing that leaves her feeling really exhausted. And that her mother did say once that she just wants her to be okay. And so maybe she might be reacting out of fear or because the illness is out of her control. And it's true. Sometimes we react quite a bit when things are out of our control. And the ways in which people react to not being in control of the circumstances often isn't very helpful, right? That's why we're talking about effective and empathic communication. And by the way, all my slides today will be sent to you. And if you want to share them with other people, maybe you want to have this as a way to start conversations with people, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. And it's that vulnerability. It's allowing the space in the conversation to say, if you're feeling that something is out of your control or you're having some fear, let's talk about it. I want to talk about how you feel that my illness is out of your control. I want to talk about how you're feeling afraid. Let's talk about that. Let's open that up, because that is going to be a lot better in your conversations, even if it's difficult at first, than having cyclical conversations about advice giving or setting boundaries and things like that. So I'm not getting any responses for setting boundaries with this person, but certainly I think we could all come up with, ooh, I've just got one. Okay, great. I've had a tough day, so I empathize. I know how much this person means to you. I was just going to bed since I do have early morning meetings. Oh, a couple of comments, sorry, folks. Since I do best at early morning meetings, if I get rest the night before and I have a big morning presentation, would tomorrow night after 6 p.m. work for you, or this weekend for tea? I think that's great. Offering it another solution, explaining why you're not able to, talk at that very minute. I think it's very important. I am so sorry that happened to you. Must feel really bad. We can talk for about 5 minutes now, and I'd love to talk about more about it, but let's see, I have to go to a meeting early tomorrow morning. So can we set a time to talk later on tomorrow? Excellent. I'm really sorry that you're going through this. I'm really tired right now, so I feel I won't be able to give you my full attention. Let's chat tomorrow at 6 p.m. Then we can really get into it. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And this is a really good example specifically for this one of just being honest. I don't think I can give you my full attention right now. You deserve that. You deserve my full attention. So let's make sure we talk about this later. The other person had said, we could talk for 5 minutes, but that's about it. The one thing I would caution with that is then if you only have the 5 minutes to talk, let's say you're talking with that person. Okay, remember, I did say I only had a couple minutes to chat, so let's make sure we pick this back up tomorrow. Excellent. You guys didn't even need my presentation. You're already pros. All right. So we're talking about communication advocacy at the doctor's office. So a lot of folks have different ways of navigating how they talk to their physicians or their doctor's office in general. Certainly with COVID, we went from a period of time where overnight, again, it seemed like we were all doing so much in person, and then we ended up doing it virtually. But I think even before that, oftentimes we didn't feel that like we had a voice at our doctor's office. I just wanted to briefly talk about finding ways to communicate at the doctor's office. I worked at a cancer center for several years, and so I'd often talk with patients about the same thing, that when we have doctors who are very busy and very specialized, we can try to find different ways of communicating with them in a way that is both, again, effective and empathic. So I often recommend if there is an online portal to send messages to your doctor, use it, because this can help you get answers to quick questions or even expedite referrals for something that you need. I will oftentimes have a lot of patients come to me saying, oh, I want to ask my doctor about such and such, but I'm just going to wait until I have our appointment. Well, not only does that delay you getting such and such information, right, that you need, maybe it's about a symptom you're having or about a service or procedure that you're considering, the doctor might be able to write back to you at a time when they're not pressured to squeeze in so much during your next appointment. So they might actually be able to give their full attention to the question. And again, it might be expedited. So it may not always be your doctor who's writing the message, but the teams do check in with the doctors for their opinions. I have been in a doctor's workroom with a nurse or a nurse practitioner or physician's assistant answering messages for their doctor at the same time. And they're literally leaning over, hey doc, I'm emailing with such and such person. What do you think about this? So don't think that just because if it's not the doctor who's responding to that message, that the doctors aren't somehow, giving their feedback. It could just be that they're meeting with other patients, but they're still invested in answering the question that you have. Anything about the minutia of your appointment, try to address it ahead of time, or even I'll sometimes bring a cheat sheet to my doctor's appointments. Here's the date of this procedure that I had. Here's all of my active medications. I mean, just make all of that little stuff go, so that you can get to the real juice of what you want to talk about at that particular, whether it's a brand new follow-up, like a longer visit, or if it's just a follow-up. Oftentimes people are afraid to ask for clarification because the doctor's appointments go so fast that they'll say, sometimes the doctors or even the nurses might say something like, you understand what I'm saying, right? And the way that is phrased is in a way to keep the conversation going. You're put in a position where you feel like you have to be agreeable because you don't want to take up the doctor's time. But if you don't understand something or you're not following, break it up. Break up the flow of the conversation. No, I'm sorry. Could you run that by me again? I don't follow. What are my next steps? Do I need to call this person to schedule, or do I need to wait to call them? Okay, so I need to wait for them to call me. If they don't call me in how many days, who can I call? Get clarification. Have a notebook in front of you. You want to know what the next steps are for your care. And it's still your appointment. Even if the doctors are going from person to person to person to person, you still get to have the benefit of getting those questions answered for the procedures or whatever else might be recommended at the time. So let's say you're considering a second opinion. So maybe you don't particularly care for the treatment plan that your doctor is offering, or maybe you just don't care for your physician. You don't feel like they're really getting a good connection. You can seek a second opinion. There's nothing wrong with it. Every patient should feel entitled to do it. Even my patients, when we're talking about counseling, I start every beginning of the intake, first session. I may not be the therapist for you. I am more than happy to get you the next person who might be a better fit. Maybe folks want an older therapist. Maybe they want somebody who knows more about their personal experience based on how they identify. And I can't change the style that I have. And if that person is not finding it to be effective, it is my duty, my responsibility to get it to that person. So if you're concerned about insurance coverage and who's in network, who specializes in your care, you could certainly check that out. The fun fact I wanted to bring up, I often would have patients who would be reluctant about getting a second opinion, but as soon as they bring it up to their physician, I just want to let you know I'm considering getting a second opinion. Great. I know this person at this other hospital who does similar work. Feel free to follow up with them and see if they either confirm the treatment plan or if they make any follow-up recommendations. And a lot of times, if you get that second opinion, you come back to that physician. Yes, this person agreed with you on blah, 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 but maybe not on this particular aspect of the treatment. Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, why don't we explore that? Many times physicians and treatment care providers, they check in with their community for maybe a more complex case or something like that and try to work around that. But I think it's really important that you know that it's something that you're entitled to and that your doctor shouldn't be necessarily offended or concerned about that. So what if you like the doctor's treatment recommendations, but not their bedside manner? Or what if there's limited specialists in my area? Maybe there's only one, sarcoidosis specialist in your area. So then you can ask if you can meet with an advanced practice provider. Many different types of degrees. Maybe it's a certified nurse practitioner, physician's assistant. And just to give you an idea, for this, I actually didn't particularly care for even just my primary care physician, but I loved her nurse practitioner in the office. So from now on, I only see the nurse practitioner for those appointments. Super simple. It's a convenient office. Again, it's just primary care. Nothing wrong with me seeing somebody else in the office. In fact, those people often have better and faster availability. And then you may be already meeting with those particular providers, but maybe you just want to meet with them more frequently. For specialized care, doctors' offices may say, okay, for this person's follow-up, they'll meet with the physician once every other appointment, and then with the advanced practice provider for the other ones. So then you can say, well, I'm happy to see the doctor, but why don't I see the advanced practice provider more often? So maybe I'll see my doctor every 4 visits instead of every other visit, or what have you. So that might be something you can try to leverage that to get more of that, again, better direct care with that person. Somebody asked you ask directly to see only the nurse practitioner. You can sometimes do that at scheduling. So if you're literally just scheduling your follow-up, you can say, can I schedule with this person? Or again, you can use the, through our hospital systems, it's called MyChart. It's through the Epic medical record system. So you can send a MyChart message saying, hey, I'm just wondering, can I meet with so-and-so at my next appointment? And to remember that if you do send those messages, it's often visible by the whole treatment team. So you certainly don't want to say because this doctor is a jerk, because the doctor might be able to see that. But sometimes you can. The other thing is you can also ask that advanced practice provider at that next appointment. Say you really like the physician's assistant in your doctor's office. Hey, I really like working with you. Can I make sure I see you more often? You're not putting them in an uncomfortable position. That person might actually be able to leverage it with the doctor and say, hey, this person wants to just see me. I have more availability. Is that okay with you? Doctors are usually fine with that because, again, the doctors are still providing the treatment recommendations. I've got another message. I had COVID in May. I had awesome physicians in Detroit, but had to move home, and it's been frustrating getting doctors to hear my issues. I'm dealing with some long hauler issues with COVID. I'm so bummed. I'm so sorry to hear that. I've been with this physician since I was diagnosed with sarcoidosis years ago, so it's hard to leave him. That's true, right? And I'm going to say this actually for not just our relationships with our care providers, but with any relationship that you have. Keep check to see if the longevity of that relationship is the only reason you're staying with it. I've been friends with this person since we were so young. Do I really want to end it just because we're having some more disagreements? Maybe, right? We don't necessarily get any benefit back to us just because we've suffered through a relationship for a certain period of time. So, and the other thing, so if you really liked the care team that you worked with back in another state, another province, people are trying to connect with people in specialized care. Send them a message or give their office a call. Hey, I just want to let you folks know I had a really great treatment experience with you back when I had COVID in May. Now I'm in this other part of the country. I'm just wondering, do you have any recommendations for doctors I can see for follow-up? Right? So they may have actual connections and recommendations that they can follow up with you. I really like the even for me, if my schedule is too busy, but a patient really liked the way that I recommended we start treatment together. Hey, I'd really like somebody who has a similar style as you. Great. Let me refer you to my colleague who's in this particular practice who has more evening or weekend availability. But also to validate that it is hard when you've established with somebody, you've been vulnerable, they've known you since the beginning of treatment. But remember that this is a service that the doctor provides for you. So this is another thing I sort of wanted to, because again, the fear or concern about offending people is often why we don't set boundaries or advocate for ourselves. Being offended is personal, but your healthcare is not. Your doctors shouldn't, they should care about you, but they shouldn't really be all too concerned about your criticism of their recommendations, or if there's something else that you need a little bit more. You and your insurance, if you have it, are covering the cost of this care. So your doctor is working for you. So if they're not providing the service that you think that you should be entitled to, that's when you start looking at something else. So again, if somebody came to me and said, listen, Sandra, our therapy isn't really working, I just think I need a different kind of style, that to me is not personal. They're not saying I'm a bad person. They're not saying I'm a lousy therapist. It just means that it's just not working for them. That's not a personal thing. So I would be happy to refer that person to somebody else because I am working for them. And if I'm not working for them, if we're somehow not connecting, it's my duty really to sort of follow them up with somebody else. Another piece for advocacy that I think is really helpful. So if you're requesting a procedure or test that you think would be helpful, maybe you've talked in your SARC community and people have made recommendations, or they've all talked about a certain test that they got when they were first diagnosed, but maybe you're newly diagnosed, you haven't gotten that test. Why isn't my doctor giving me this? Ask that the doctor document your request in the medical chart, and if possible, the reason for why the test is being denied. Just to make sure that the doctor is denying you that test for a specific reason. Because another thing is, let's say you go on to get that second opinion. That first opinion, that primary opinion, those notes are often sent over to that second opinion physician or practice team, right? Well, gosh, I don't know why they didn't give you this and this and this and this test. If it's documented in the chart, then they can follow up and look at the records and say, oh, that's where that person was coming from. Okay, I get it. Or conversely, if there was really no reason for why it was being denied, one of two things will happen. Either that's documented in the chart, and if you need to file a formal complaint, then it's there. Or two, the person who's providing that service might feel more inclined to actually give you that procedure or test or recommend it. If you must file a formal complaint, type out a timeline with as many details as possible. Every major treatment facility will have some kind of system of office management or healthcare management where you could follow up with them and say, hey, I've been meeting with this doctor. I've been getting what I see as inadequate care. Or not even a physician, it could be anybody, social worker or a medical assistant or nurse or whomever. Write out a timeline. Who is it that you interacted with? Who witnessed some of the different exchanges that were happening? What was recommended or what wasn't recommended? How did you feel from the exchange? And if you have it all documented, and again, a timeline is helpful. How many, was it just the first visit that you felt upset about, or was it, like somebody had said before, a long-standing relationship that after a certain point just didn't seem like it was working anymore? To help you advocate for yourself if you have to. So I really loved this. Before we even got together, we asked, with whom in your life do you feel you have the best communication? Unfortunately, some folks said nobody, no one. Everything that I have on here, except for I would say the neuropsychologist, which I thought was a great answer, had indicated a response that was shared by multiple other people. A lot of people said my spouse. A lot of people said God. A lot of people said their neighbors, extended family. One person said myself, which I thought was fantastic. So good for you if that was you who said that. I thought that felt super empowering to see that there was somebody like that. And then, coworkers, friends. There's no limit to the kind of people that you can have good communication with. And sometimes we get surprised, the people that are most unexpected. One of my closest friends that was a former manager of mine, now I consider to be almost like a spiritual fairy godmother. I consider her one of my best friends, and she's over twice my age. But again, our lives are filled with people who surprise us, but it isn't the expectation of who in our life will give us a good communication. It's who do we connect with? Who do we get that validation that we're seeking? And who is that person, like we said, who's sort of modeling after Mr. Rogers or other kind people who sort of follow those give protocols to us? But I want to hear from you before we end today. What makes this communication so good? For those people that you sort of typed in that chat for me, you know, what made it so good? What is that communication that those people are giving to you? And it can be short things or it could be long things. Understanding and support, absolutely. Even though we don't always understand, well, we won't always understand 100% of what other people are saying. It's at least that attempt, right? I'm trying to understand you. I'm trying to support you. Somebody being a good listener, love and acceptance as I am, unconditional support, my ups and downs, my good and bad, good, bad, and ugly. They really listen and acknowledge. Definitely. And the thing that I like about all of this is that we can try to model ourselves after the people who do these good things for us. We can try to evoke the same positivity that they bring to our lives. No judgment, complete empathy and full emotional support. Consistent support does not fade in the twilight times. No fair weather friends for us. No, thank you very much. There's a lot in common here, right? And we're just about out of time today, folks. I've included a few references here. You know, there's a lot of really good information out there about communication. A lot of good stuff.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you so much for everyone who came and contributed to this session. It was just really excellent. I didn't even notice we were going over time a little bit, so I hope
that's a good sign.
Yeah, I think so. So thank you again to everybody who came. I can imagine folks got a lot out of it. I will be sending out Sandra's slides shortly after this, and so that should be in your email boxes. And Sandra, again, as always, thank you so very much for this excellent.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone. And just remember that all of this takes practice, and all of this is not always going to be comfortable. It feels awkward. It feels vulnerable. But the more vulnerable we can be with other people, the easier that communication will be.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, folks. Take care.